My goal with this video is to help you be the best possible rhythm gypsy jazz guitarist you can be. We're going to concentrate on 3 pillars to avoid all the mistakes that I made early on in my career. And so you're never the weak link in a jam session or in any musical situation that you find yourself in. But on the contrary, you're that rare person who everyone wants to play with because their rhythm is so tight. Now I realize this is probably the most controversial, complex and polarizing subject in the whole gypsy jazz microcosm. So go easy on me. I can already see all the warriors of the way, as Dennis Chan calls it, go crazy in the comments. But relax, it's not that important. Actually, it is. This is a subject I am very passionate about and I care a lot about, as gypsy jazz has been my life for a long, long time now. And I found myself in every possible situation that you can imagine and experienced the full spectrum of scenarios possible in this field. In case you don't know me, I'm Dario Napoli. And besides having studied with several legends of this world of gypsy jazz, Fapi Lafertin, Lolo Meyer, Vava Adler, and plenty more. I've also been a touring and recording artist now for 20 years. And besides being friends with him for a long time now, the rhythm player in my band is Benji Winterstein. If not the best, considered one of the best gypsy jazz rhythm players of the modern generation. Now, of course, there isn't really just one absolute right way to play gypsy jazz rhythm. I know I put that in the title, but you're watching the video, right? But what I've seen over the years is that there are definite common denominators that all the greatest players adopt. Now, we've all been at jam sessions or concerts where the rhythm is good, and it's just something magical about gypsy jazz when it's played well. But we've also been at jam sessions or concerts where the rhythm was not so good, and all it takes is one player whose rhythm is not so good to make things not quite as fun. Now, before we get into the musical details, I want to tell you a little bit about my story, just some parts of it, so that you understand where I'm coming from. I fell in love with this music in the early 2000s, and for many years, I didn't know what I didn't know. You might also be in a place where you don't know what you don't know, and that's okay. But after a while of not knowing what I didn't know and trying to play this music just by listening to records, I realized a lot was missing. And slowly over time, I started looking for guidance. I eventually got to know and made friends with a lot of legends in this world, some of which I mentioned before, and in particular decided to start studying this music with Fapi Lafertin. Now, the first time I visited Fapi, mid-2000s, I decided to go for 3-4 days, and I thought, I'm going to take some days so we can really work on a little bit of everything. Well, guess what? All we did for 3 or 4 days that I stayed there was exclusively rhythm. And Fapi taught me a lot about the mechanics and the specific requirements of both hands, all of which I don't have time to go in this video, but I'll try to cover as much as possible and give you what I think is essential of what I learned from Fapi. So those were the 3 phases for me. At first, I didn't know what I didn't know. After studying with Fapi and several other gypsies, I then knew what I needed to know, but definitely was not able to do it. And then the rest of the time, I've been bridging that gap, knowing what I needed to know, and then finally, gradually being able to do it. So I want you to keep that progression in mind. You don't know what you don't know, then you know what you need to know, but you're not able to do it. And then you know what you need to know, and you're able to do it. One last thing before we jump in with both feet. I highly suggest watching this video right here, where I covered several foundational aspects of gypsy jazz and gypsy jazz rhythm. Make sure to stick around until the end. I will show you the one exercise that completely changed my life that I learned from Fapi Lafertin that will, I promise you, solidify any mechanical and technical requirements needed for proper gypsy jazz rhythm. Why don't we start with the founders of this style of music, Django Reinhardt and Joseph Reinhardt themselves? Let's listen to this example first. And how about this example? And here's one last example. So let's get into the 3 pillars that I consider absolutely must know to consistently progress and improve in your gypsy jazz rhythm journey. Now, the basic La Pompe gypsy jazz rhythm, which is swing rhythm really, consists of 1 and 3 and then 2 and 4. In other words, whatever happens on 1 happens again on 3, and what happens on 2 then happens again on 4. And I'm referring, of course, to the 4 movements of a 4/4 measure. So pillar number 1, 1 and 3. So I'm going to start by showing you and having you hear it, and then we're going to break it down. So 1 and 3. If I were to do it super slow motion, these are the components of 1 and 3. I have an upstroke, a downstroke, and a bounce. If you listen carefully to Django's versions, you hear that there are no mutes or absolute mutes. Both the upstroke and the downstroke of the 1 and 3 are actually all played. Now they're brought together so close that sometimes it might sound like something is muted or something is not played fully. But when you slow it down and really listen to it, you can really hear So how do I get those 2 motions to play very close to each other but yet play fully? And the answer is, the way Fabi Lafertin taught me, is your arm is like a whip, and you want to really launch your arm as you would when you launch a whip, while keeping the wrist loose and while rotating the forearm, so that when your pick glides through the strings, you're actually really rotating the forearm so the pick can really travel quickly through the strings. Now, the very last component of the 1 and 3 is the bounce, which is a quick return upwards towards the top of the guitar, which sets up the 2 and 4. So what do I have? Up, down, bounce. Ideally, you want to be covering all 6 strings. Of course, you want to maybe give prevalence to the bass notes, bass strings, but if you're capable of hitting all 6 strings this way, which you can if you use the rotation of the forearm correctly, then that way you can be much more uniform in your strokes, just like a good drummer would be. Now, that bounce is critical, especially on faster tempos. If you set yourself up with the bounce, then all you have to do on 2 and 4 is fall down. But we'll get in more detail with that soon. So that bounce, try to think of it a little bit like when you get kicked in the knee and your knee jerks upwards. You know, when you have that medical visit and the doctor's checking you out and they hit you in the middle of the knee, lightly, but just enough so that your knee bounces up. That is the feeling you want to achieve with that bounce, where it's not a conscious movement, but a reaction. It's just a natural reaction to the flow of your motion. So that way it's not something you have to think about, but that just happens naturally and allows you to flow through as you play rhythm and set yourself up for 2 and 4. So here it is. So that's 1 and 3. An upstroke, downstroke, and a bounce. That's your first pillar. You want to make sure you work on 1 and 3 and 2 and 4 separately so that you get really proficient at them individually first. Now pillar number 2, 2 and 4. So you've just finished 1 and 3 and your arm is a little bit above the bouche, whether it's grande bouche or petit bouche. But you finish your 1 and 3 and you've bounced, and so your arm is all set to do what? To simply fall through the strings, again through all 6 strings. Now here the key is to really stay loose and not generate the motion forcibly with your arm, but just really let the arm fall, and again by rotating the forearm, the pick will travel more rapidly through the strings, generating that guillotine accent sound. Also, if your wrist is loose and you're rotating your forearm, you'll be a lot smoother and you won't run into the exaggerated sound which some people don't realize they do in jam sessions, and they just kill it for everyone. But if you stay loose, you'll have a strict, solid sound, but not invasive. You want an accent on 2 and 4, but it doesn't always have to be so much louder than 1 and 3 that it hurts everyone else's sound. So that's 2 and 4. It's just really a fall of the arm, a rotation of the forearm, and you're giving the accent on the chord, highlighting that swing of the 2 and 4. So in a nutshell, that's it. You have 1 and 3 and 2 and 4. Now, is that the only way to play gypsy jazz rhythm? Of course not. There have been many evolutions, there are many traditions, there's many different forms and variations of this. But again, when you go back to the founders, Django and Joseph Reinhardt, and you listen to most of the recordings as I showed you earlier, typically you have these common denominators, as we said earlier. Now, some players like to highlight only the basses on the 1 and 3. Some players just like to do no upstroke and do all downstrokes. And there's a place for all of this. You can find your own variations. But if you're capable of playing the pompe the way Django and Joseph play it, which is the most challenging way, then every other variation will be a breeze to learn. So my suggestion is to really concentrate on developing the skills to play the pompe the way Django played it, and then you can make all the choices and variations you wish. But to skip that phase and to skip that process will hurt the development of those necessary skills, which will also influence your single note and your soloing. So just as Fabi was really hard on me to learn the way Django and Joseph played rhythm, I suggest you to do the same. Now, the third pillar has 2 components. Do not use backing tracks, or at least not always. Think about it. If you don't live in a gypsy camp, or you don't have access to jams every day of the week, like most of us don't, and you just practice at home, if you don't make your own backing tracks, who are you going to play rhythm for? And when are you going to work on rhythm? That's what happens to a lot of people. They focus only on their soloing and on their lead play, and they use backing tracks to do that, and then they never play rhythm. So what's the best way to work around that? Is to make your own backing tracks. Use a metronome sometimes, don't use a metronome, do whatever you want. But make your own backing tracks so that you build the endurance to play a tune for 3, 4, 5 rounds as you would in a real jam session or concert. Because building the endurance and the technique to do that, just like anything else, is learned by doing it. So if you never work on rhythm, or you never work on playing rhythm for tunes for 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 or more sequences or choruses, as we say, then when you're going to have to do it, you won't be prepared. And then you get tired, you get tendinitis because you've never worked on it. Simplest thing you can do is just pick tunes to work on and create your own backing tracks. Now, of course, from time to time, if you want to breeze through a backing track and play and record yourself soloing, that's fine, but make sure that's not the only way you're practicing and you're incorporating making your own backing tracks. And then the second part of the third pillar is play rhythm along with the records. It astounds me how few people I know that do this within my students or other people that I know. They play their solos, they play rhythm and jams, but they never take a record and really play along with Joseph Reinhardt or Hono Winterstein or Nuche and play the whole tune along with them. Benji Winterstein, for example, he tells me that that's the primary way he learned to play, was to play along records, as well as with other people, of course, but playing along records. So here's a quick example of that. as promised, here is the one exercise which I baptized as the mother of all exercises, because it really is the best exercise that I've ever ran into in terms of foundational mechanics technique builder. Remember how I said in the 1 and the 3 you want to make sure you're hitting all 6 strings ideally? This is the exercise that will get you to do this easily. So for example, let's take an A or a G or any set of notes that you can play on the low E string and on the high E string. Even G is fine. You're going to be ringing the low and the high note, and you're going to be muting everything else in the middle. Again, imagine that your arm is a whip and that the pick is the tip of the whip. With an upstroke, you're going to be hitting all 6 strings, covering the range of 6 strings as if it was one big string. With an upstroke and then with a downstroke. Now it's key that you don't use your arm so much in your elbow or forearm, but that you rotate the forearm with a loose wrist. That way you're delegating all the work to the wrist as opposed to generating tension on the shoulder and on the elbow. And to really test yourself, you can use a metronome. So here it is, you're going to start with quarters, right? Again, extremities are ringing, everything in the middle is muted. I'm rotating my forearm, not using my arm and shoulder and elbow, but rotating. While covering the range of 6 strings. When I'm comfortable at quarter notes, I double. When I'm comfortable at 8th notes, I double, maintaining the same sensation and fluidity. When I'm comfortable at 16ths, I then double to 32nd notes. The goal of this exercise is to maintain the same exact sensation and the same exact mechanics from quarter, 8th, 16th, and 32nd notes. If you notice that while trying this exercise your technique or your mechanics are altered, then slow it down again. But when you can do this exercise comfortably, breaking down quarters, 8th, 16th, and 32nd notes, and maintaining the same technique and same mechanics, you will have taken a huge step towards creating that foundational technique and the foundational mechanics for everything gypsy jazz, both for rhythm and for single notes. So every now and then, jump into the mother of all exercises. I guarantee you it will do wonders for your playing. All right, now of course in a short YouTube video it's impossible to cover all the nuances and all the aspects, but I hope that with this video I was able to at least give you some solid ground and some solid foundational concepts that you want to make sure that you're incorporating in your studying. I truly hope this video was helpful to you. Definitely let me know in the comments if you have any questions. I will definitely be touching upon the subject of gypsy jazz rhythm guitar again. But hopefully there's enough material here to point you in the right direction and to make sure you're doing all you can to be the best possible rhythm guitar player that you can be. Make sure to check the description. I have a few links that I think can be of great help. There's my new book, Gypsy Jazz Guitar Mastery. There's a link to my Zoom sessions on Tuesday, as well as free transcriptions. Also, don't forget to subscribe, share, like, and all the good YouTube stuff. And I'll be seeing you soon in the next video.